Kalaniyo tadam dammo tadamoniyo Kalaniyo 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 tmetullalo heyenaniyo
Theodore Comet, born in 1924. Ted Comet is Honorary Associate Executive Vice President of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, JDC. He has been involved in Jewish communal affairs since the end of World War II, when he served in France as a student volunteer in a JDC program to rehabilitate war orphans. His major career concerns have been meeting the needs of Israel and world Jewry. In 1990, he joined the JDC, becoming its Associate Executive Vice President. It was a dramatic time as the downfall of communism permitted entree to Jewish communities in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. There were major undertakings to help Jews, now free to leave, to rebuild local Jewish communities and to care for the large number of dependent elderly. It was also a period of dramatic rescue from Ethiopia and Sarajevo, and saving the financially ruined Argentine Jewry. He led many missions to the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, North Africa, India, and Latin America. Since 1997, he was Executive Vice President of the World Council of Jewish Communal Service, an international association of Jewish communal professionals, which, through quadrennial gatherings in Jerusalem, regional conferences, and publications, fostered networking and interchange to enhance the skills of professionals in dealing with the growing challenges facing Jewish communities. From 1968 to 1990, he was Assistant Director of the Council of Jewish Federations, where he wore multiple hats. As Director of International Affairs, his responsibility was to assess the needs of Israel and Jewish communities worldwide, shaping the response of federations, which he helped evolve from philanthropy to partnership as the primary funders of JDC and the Jewish Agency for Israel, JAFI. As Director of Human Resource Development, he initiated activities to attract and retain young leaders, as well as programs to deepen the knowledge base and leadership skills of board members. As Director of the annual Council of Jewish Federations General Assembly, he helped make it the central gathering of American Jewish leadership, imbuing it with stronger Jewish content and adding the presence of a younger generation and the leaders of Jewish communities overseas. As the first director of Project Otzma, he established a new program to bring gifted young people to Israel for volunteer service, many of whom later entered the Jewish communal field. From 1956 to 1968, he was National Director of the American Zionist Youth Foundation, the central sponsor of Israel programs for American Jewish youth. He was founder and chairman of the Israel Parade on Fifth Avenue and produced Israel folk dance festivals at Carnegie Hall and for the New York World's Fair. Long active on behalf of Soviet Jewry, he served as volunteer coordinator of the Conference on Soviet Jewry and organized the first large-scale public demonstration of solidarity. In 1972, he led the first mission of Federation leaders to the Soviet Union. Deeply connected to the Holocaust, his late wife Shoshana was a survivor, he represented JDC in its co-sponsorship at the Holocaust Museum in Washington of its first conference on displaced persons camps, where he delivered a paper on Life Reborn in the Displaced Persons Camps, an untold story of courage. Ted is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, and a graduate of Yeshiva University. He has 2 children, a daughter in Boston with a degree in social work, and a son in Jerusalem who is a clinical psychologist. He has 6 grandchildren, 12 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild.
Shalom. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you tonight. And this has been the major thesis of my late wife, who was a survivor and an artist, how to transmute trauma into something positive. In 1946, I went to France as a student volunteer to work in a program funded by the Joint Distribution Committee for the rehabilitation of war orphans. I was a student at Yeshiva University at the time. France, for the first time, brought 800 child survivors from Auschwitz to France. What to do with the 800? So Jose established orphan homes that were supported by the Joint Distribution Committee. And this Robert Gamzon came to America to recruit young men and women to be counselors, to live with them, to be like the big brothers and sisters, to fill a bit of the gap that they had lost with the deaths of their families. So when he came in, he told us the story, so we were very, very moved by it. There's an interesting anecdote connected to this. Before I left, a friend of mine said, I have a cousin living in Versailles because of the war. We haven't really connected. Would you look him up? I said, I have no idea where I'm going to be assigned. So I put the name in my wallet and forgot all about it until I come to France. And where do you think they sent me? To the children's home in Versailles. So I was brought there late at night. I just met the director. In the morning, I had breakfast. These are older teenagers. Across from me was this teenager. And between my broken French, Yiddish, Hebrew, we got a conversation. I was very impressed with the kid. And then I went out for a walk, and after a few blocks, I remembered the cousin. So I take out the piece of paper. The address is 63 Avenue de Paris. I look up. The street I'm walking on is Avenue de Paris. I said, I can't believe he lives on the same street. I reached 63, turns out to be the address of the children's home. Now I'm totally flummoxed. I walk in and I went up to the only person I knew besides the director, who was the teenager I had breakfast with. And I said, tell me, is there anyone here by the name of Elie Wiesel? And the kid looks up at me and he said, c'est moi. So that's how I began my 70-year friendship with Elie Wiesel. Look, when he first came to New York, he lived in a block away from me, so many Shabbat experiences we became very, very close. But it's also almost inexplicable how somebody who came here without any assets, he really didn't have family here, didn't have connections here, didn't have money, didn't have anything. And to go from there and to end up to be one of the most renowned world figures, I mean, this is extraordinary.
אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. ויף על פי שיתממה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. ויף על פי שיתממה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה.
One of the things that struck me with Eli was part of a chavrus of a small group of four. And what happened to the other three? One became a professor of astrophysics at the Sorbonne. Another one became the world's greatest authority on Provence, which is early French from the time of Rashi. And the fourth one established a modern yeshiva. And every time I think about that, I mean, it breaks my heart to think what was achieved by these four random survivors. What did we lose in the 6 million? What intellects? What somebody might have been found a solution to cancer. All the intellectual qualities that were drowned out in that disaster. My tribute to Elie Wiesel, the closing, I was saying, how this man took his trauma, and pushed us to be more aware, more sensitive, more caring, more alert to what's going on. And by doing that, he pushed us to be more human. And by making us more human, he enabled us to touch the divine.
ערב של שושנים נצאנה אל הבוסתן מור בסמים ולבונה לרגלך מפתן ערב של שושנים נצאנה אל הבוסתן מור בסמים ולבונה לרגלך מפתן לילה יורד לאט ורוח שושן נושבה הווה אל חשלך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה לילה יורד לאט ורוח שושן נושבה הווה אל חשלך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה שחר הומה יונה ראשך מעלה טללים פיך אל הבוקר שושנה הכתפנו לי ערב של שושנים נצאנה אל הבוסתן מור בסמים ולבונה לרגלך מפתן שחר הומה יונה ראשך מעלה טללים פיך אל הבוקר שושנה הכתפנו לי שחר הומה יונה
Shoshana Comet grew up in Antwerp, Belgium, the daughter of Charlotte and Marcus Unger, a successful diamond dealer. She was the third of 5 sisters. Their world was shattered by Hitler's invasion of Belgium on May 10, 1940. Before dawn the next morning, the family fled, leaving behind their possessions. Their flight took them first to the northern and western parts of Belgium. As the German blitzkrieg quickly overran the country, they crossed the border into France. There, they were bombed and shot at, caught in the crossfire between the German and French armies. Not knowing where to turn, they crisscrossed France, mostly on foot. All the time they were running and hiding to escape the advancing Germans and to elude French collaborators. Every night meant finding a place to sleep. Every morning not knowing if they would be turned in. Every day meant finding food and making fateful decisions about where to flee next. After many harrowing experiences, they made their way over the Spanish border into neutral Portugal. In Lisbon, the request for asylum in the United States was coldly rejected. After many unsuccessful attempts, they went to Porto in northern Portugal, where a sympathetic American consul issued them visas. They arrived in New York on May 22, 1941. In 1952, Shoshana married Ted Comet. They have 2 children, Diane in Boston, married to Martin Richler, and Joel in Jerusalem, married to Michelle Karmazin. Through them, they have 6 grandchildren, 12 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. This tribute to Shoshana celebrates the moral courage that enabled her to transcend her pain and to transmute trauma into creative healing energy as wife, mother, artist, and psychotherapist. This demonstration of moral courage is Shoshana's lasting, living spiritual legacy.
So the first tapestry, really, where she was learning the craft, but also you could see the tension that goes into the process of healing. And I was stunned that somebody who had never touched a loom could have produced something so subtle and nuanced. Now, if you're looking at the piece itself, what's interesting is the upper part is uneven. Why is it uneven? Because she's learning how to weave. As she gets more comfortable, these openings represent allowing emotion to get expressed. Now, there's always a push and pull. The one hand you have to open up, otherwise it can't heal. You open up too fast, too quickly, it gets unsettling. So look what happens. Open, shuts, open, shuts. As she gets more comfortable, the openings are more sustained. And as she gets more comfortable, this is regulated. And then on the bottom, it's like a womb, and she's ready to give birth to her art. So what's interesting here is that the dynamic of how it works is manifests itself in the very first piece that she made. People become artists because they're able to express something in art that they can't press in words. Because if they could say it in words, it's a lot easier than spending 2 years weaving this story. So I don't believe that she consciously. And it wasn't that she couldn't talk about her Holocaust experience. I think she couldn't create a coherent narrative about it. And also, I think subconsciously, she wanted to delve more deeply into the nature of the experience than she was sort of allowing herself overtly to do. So this was the opening piece of it. The first one was like a piece of jazz. She composed it on the loom. This was pre-designed. This and all the subsequent ones were pre-designed beforehand. There's just no way somebody could just do this like the first one, just compose it on the piece. What startled me, because of the ambition of the piece, she was 4'10", and here they have a 6 foot high, 4 foot wide, and a triptych, no less. So technically, it's an enormous advance. Psychologically, it's a retreat, because you don't have openings here that you had over there. What is this piece all about? And what role does it play in that process here? The role it plays, this is called an ideal world. In other words, if you look at this, it's balanced. It's almost like musical notes on the side. It's in harmony. In other words, what she was expressing here is a world that she wished existed rather than the world that she actually experienced. And what's a subtle piece here, if you notice that the round objects are reversed in their coloration, a very profound observation, which is that even in an ideal world, nothing is ever perfectly ideal. And then I had a visitor here who was an artist, and he looked at that centerpiece, and he said, you know, It's so tightly woven, it looks like it's about to burst. And that was a very perceptive remark, because the explosion takes place in the very next tapestry. She then got into the third one. And there's a Yiddish expression, adin teure mit Gott, that you hold God to account when tragedy happens. And this is her dialogue with God. There are the flames coming not literally from the ground, but from the heavens, 6 points coming down to raining its destruction. Now, it's hard to make out at first, but you can, when I explain it, you'll see. The green form is the profile of a seated woman bent over in mourning. This is the curve of her back, her hair, her arm, her bosom, her belly, her thigh. And between the woman and the flames are 2 arms, one with tefillin on it to try to ward off the flames and protect her. And here you have a hand with an Auschwitz-numbered wrist, and that asks, pourquoi? Why did this happen? She wanted to put God in there, technically the 2 letters Yud Yud, but the issue for her wasn't technical, it was theological. Where do you put God in this? On top, on the bottom? For weeks she angst over this issue. And then she said to me, I can't resolve it. Everybody's going to have to struggle with where was God. This is her name, Shoshana, on the bottom. This was the breakthrough piece, the first piece that she allowed herself to express the emotions. See, she did something which is common today, but I had never seen it at that time. By that time, most people did weavings. It was like a carpet. No, hers was very open. And the openness there is her expression about the moral void of a world that could permit the Holocaust to take place. And the woman, you could see her womb is open, meaning not only that 6 million died, but all the children and all the generations that will forever remain unborn. I mean, no matter how often I've lived with this piece, it still just grabs me. But this piece allowed her then, was the breakthrough piece. And the other one gets more personal. That arrow represents an airplane. It's dropping bombs on the field of luscious flowers whose heads are tilted in sadness. And at the base lies this dead child with a primordial head, a broken right arm. But look, there's a flower growing out of its left wrist, that even in the worst moments, there was still that aspiration for life. So that's her initial S for Shoshana, and that little smudgeon is 69. And as she took it off the loom, and she hung it up here, she became hysterical. As she recalled, they were on a train fleeing across France, and the German planes bombed the train, and they yelled, "Jump for your lives!" So this teenager, she jumped out of the train, and she landed in the field of flowers. And then the airplanes came back and machine gunned the passengers, and there was no protection. Not a tree, not a bush. It was just open grassland with flowers. And her father said, "There's no way we can survive this. Let us lie down in the grass. Let us hold hands and recite the Shema," which they did. And they weren't hit. And when she realized that she was actually replicating a literal experience, to me, this is what art is about. You're expressing something you're not conscious of. Otherwise, if you were conscious, you would talk it. So her right arm became paralyzed because in that one, the dead child has a broken right arm. And the doctors eventually said it's not physical, it's psychosomatic. She went into psychoanalysis. The analysis showed that with the weaving, she was surfacing memories which were proving so painful. She tried to stop herself from continuing by self-paralyzing her arm. It was a successful analysis, so she worked that through. And one of the other gains was that until then, anytime she'd get into an airplane flight, she'd get into a state of anxiety because to her an airplane was not a vehicle of transportation. but rather an instrument of death. And once this was worked through today, there was never after that any residual fear of flight whatsoever. So now look at this. This now, she's come out of the trauma, and this is the only one that was done for a specific occasion. And the occasion being our son's bar mitzvah. So what's her message to our son? On top are the 10 Commandments. But the 10 Commandments that you see like in your synagogues, they're always smooth-shaped. But look at this. They're very jagged-edged. What is she saying there? They're jagged-edged to represent that they've been wrenched out of the rock of Sinai. Her point here is that everyone's life is filled with sharp edges, that life is challenging, life is complex, life is difficult. And the Hebrew letters are from ancient script, and they don't remain static and locked into the tablets, but they fall out, and they add up to the priestly benediction, Yivarecha Hashem B'Yishmerecha, may the Lord bless you and protect you. And what happens to the blessing? It cascades over our son, represented by that thick purple yarmulke, the double profile of his face, meaning he bows his head as he receives the blessing, and he's covered by a talit shaped like wings. I love this to represent that you stood at Sinai. And because Sinai took place in the desert, and the desert is a metaphor for a hostile, non-nurturing world, our Jewish tradition demands that no matter how rough the going, we always have to affirm life. That was the message to our son. More importantly, it was the message to herself. She so internalized that message. She closed the loom and never touched it again the rest of her life. And there was a cascade of energy, of such force, that in a few years she got her undergraduate, her graduate, and her psychoanalytic training and became a psychotherapist. When she was asked, why are you giving up your art? She said, I'm not. To be a good therapist is more an art than it is a science. Good line. When I asked her, why did you choose weaving over painting? This is complicated and time-consuming. And she gave me a very profound answer. She said, because paint which derives from chemicals is inert, and a painting when completed is fixed in time. But whereas with wool, which comes from a living animal, there's constant movement and change in a tapestry as there is with life itself. Touche. And that's her S for her Shoshana. So this is the process by which she unshackled herself from her trauma. And then she became a psychotherapist. So people ask me, how do you know what she had in mind? And I said, because I lived with her for 50 years. That's not, because if she did that, she wouldn't need the art. If she could put into words what her emotions were, it's much easier to speak it than it is to spend 2 years on it. So no, art there's a mystery to art, all art. People do art because there's something inside that they can't verbalize. And where it all comes from, if you ask me, it's a nes gadol. It's a big mystery, a kind of a miracle where this comes from. So what we're going to hear now is a talk that my wife gave in 1988 in Jerusalem. Now, my wife had a skill I've never seen anybody else possess. She could tell somebody off, and they walk away smiling. She never taught me how to do that. Because she's basically castigating the audience. Why? For referring to survivors as victims. Her thesis was they were once victims, but those who had the ability to create new lives, to marry, to have children, to become leaders in communities. She said, These are moral and spiritual victors. And by referring to them as victims, you're pushing them into their negated past.
Can you see me? Shalom and bonjour. First, let me say that, like Rabbi Steinsaltz, I am not a professional speaker. However, I am a professional listener. The title of my paper is The Stigmatization of Unsung Heroes. It was difficult for me to prepare it, for it evoked painful memories of my own experiences, as well as those of the survivors and their children who have passed through my office, carrying the burden of their legacy. What is this legacy, and how can it be passed on to future generations in a constructive and meaningful way? My major point is that we have to change this legacy from the stigma of victim to that of a moral and spiritual victor. As I scanned the psychoanalytic literature on survivors and their children, I found that much of the research was based on a diagnostic assessment called the survivor's syndrome. This categorization, which was established as a base for the German reparations in the 50s and the 60s, relied heavily on pathology and has created a stigmatized image which needs to be redressed. Dr. Nederland, who formulated the Holocaust syndrome, describes it as survivor's guilt, chronic anxiety, tension, depression, persecutory nightmares. These classifications have unfortunately found their way into the literature and have unfairly stigmatized many survivors. I once attended a lecture on Holocaust survivors and their trauma. It was given by a prominent psychiatrist. Next to me sat a tall, elegant woman, well-groomed, beautifully dressed, and as we say in French, elle était tirée à quatre épingles. She looked proud and confident. As the lecturer began to expound on the pathology sustained by the survivors and damage done to their children, I felt my anger rising. I involuntarily turned my head and noticed that this proud woman sitting next to me had slid down in her chair, her shoulders hunched over, her face no longer visible. She had changed from a proud person to a defeated woman. I conducted an informal survey in which I asked people, unconnected to the Holocaust, what their image of the survivor was. Their responses were tuned in exclusively on the pain, terror, and helplessness of the survivors. Not one tuned in to the inner strength and courage it took to survive the inferno. There was no awareness that alongside the horror, valiant attempts were made to maintain their dignity and hold on to their values. The time has come to redress the situation. Out of empathy with their pain, we have focused on the suffering of survivors. But in that process, we have lost sight of their moral and spiritual resistance that enabled them to survive, to form new relationships, to marry, to bring children into this world, and make important contributions to Israel and Jewish communities around the globe. I am calling for the integration of the spiritual resistance with the trauma, which hopefully could remove the stigma and change the survivor's legacy from being a burden to one that not only their children can be proud of, but can serve as a source of inspiration for future generations. For in the deepest sense, the survivors have affirmed the eternity of the Jewish people that truly Am Yisrael Chai.
Shoshana, 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 ירח נישא אל ענן, תבוא אליי שושנה, בים עוד יחליק קפיטן.
היה ים סוער, התורן חרק, חרטום הספינה כמעט ונשחק, אך יוסקה על כל העניין התגבר, וזמר על עסקו זימר.
שושנה, 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 ירח נישא אל ענן, תבוא אליי שושנה, בים עוד יחליק קפיטן.
ב13 דן הרים עוד כוסים, לפתע הגיעו ספינות המשקים, אך דני אמר מה יש נסתדר, וזמר על עסקו זימר.
שושנה, 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 ירח נישא אל ענן, תבוא אליי שושנה, בים עוד יחליק קפיטן.
הייתה זאת פיגורה מאוד עלובה, את שמוליק הגוץ לקפריסין הובה, אך גם התיישב אחרי הגדר, וזמר על עסקו זימר.
שושנה, 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 ירח נישא אל ענן, תבוא אליי שושנה, בים עוד יחליק קפיטן.
מסע הימים הגיע לסוף, סירות עם ג'מל, אורות מן החוף, ועד אל שושנה כל איש הסתער, וזמר על עסקו זימר.
שושנה, 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 ירח נישא אל ענן, תבוא אליי שושנה, בים עוד יחליק קפיטן.
Then I asked her, why did you choose weaving over painting? And she gave me an interesting response. She said, well, paint derives from chemicals as inert, and a painting is fixed in time. Whereas with wool, which comes from a live animal, there's constant movement and change in a tapestry, as there is with life itself. She used to say that the best way for self-healing is to use your pain to heal somebody else. And we all need, in various forms, self-healing. So this is a way of healing ourselves. The best way, in a sense, for our own individual growth is to make a difference in other people's lives. Oh, and by the way, there's one great line from Einstein. He said, we make a living by what we can get. We make a life by what we can give.
על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על ביתנו התינוקת שמורי לי הטוב, על האש המבוערת, על המים הזכים, על האיש השב הביתה מן המרחקים, על כל אלה, על כל אלה, שוב לי, אלי הטוב, על הדבש ועל רחוק נושר כוכב, משאלות ליבי בחושך נרשמות עכשיו. אנא שמור לי על כל אלה ועל אהובי נפשי, על השקט, על הבכי ועל בית השיר. על כל אלה, על כל אלה, שמעת לי אלי אדון, על הדשא, על העומק, על המראה
You're grateful that I'm coming here to share. I'm grateful for you. It has meaning to me, being here and getting your positive response. This is, I can almost cry, this is what makes my life at 99, still have meaning and have purpose. So, I've got one surviving colleague, and he says, where do you get the energy to do what you do? I said, you're only focused on the energy needed to do it. You don't talk about the energy that you get back from doing it. She used to tell me the biggest challenge that every person faces is how they handle trauma. Because everybody has trauma. Even when I got sixth graders, I said, haven't you been furious at times, felt betrayed by family, school, friend? What do you do with the anger? And she said, often the anger consumes us. And she said, what's the advice given? Usually, put it behind you and move on. She says, no, there's something more that can be done. And that is to use the trauma and transmute the trauma into creative energy.
Mit Feuer und Flamme hat man uns gebrannt. Überall hat man uns gemacht zu Schand, zu Spott. Doch abzutreten von uns hat doch keiner nicht gewagt. Von unserer heilige Tore, von unserer Gebot. Keili, Keili, Lomo Asaftoni, Keili, Ich hielt mit meiner auf dein Teure und ich weil Shema Yisrael Adoshem Elokeinu Adoshem
The biggest response, of course, to the tragedy of the Holocaust is to be fully engaged in the creative continuity of the Jewish people. That's been the challenge of my life, and I hope it'll be the challenge of those who come after me. Shalom uvracha.
אלף פרחים לפתע יפרחו, יכסו את עין המדבר. הררייך חמה יפרחו, את בכל האור היסר. אלף פרחים לפתע יפרחו, יכסו את עין המדבר. זמר זמר לך, זמר זמר לך, זמר לך מחולתי מחולתי. המגר סופר, זמר לך תופר, זמר לך מחולתי מחולתי. הררייך חמה יפרחו, את בכל האור היסר. אלף פרחים לפתע יפרחו, יכסו את עין המדבר. הררייך חמה יפרחו, את בכל האור היסר. אלף פרחים לפתע יפרחו, יכסו את עין המדבר.